We're here for the Aspire program listening session. Caitlin, if you flip to the next slide, we'll start going through what you're about to experience. Today's session is about Aspire, which is part of the New Jersey Economic Recovery Act, signed in 2021 on January 7th, that created a package of tax incentive, financing, and grant programs, all done to build a stronger and fairer New Jersey economy. It's a broad-based recovery bill and a reform bill that was created to better position New Jersey to recover from economic crisis caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, while still remaining true to the NJEDA's commitments to transparency and accountability. And you can find out everything you want to know about the Economic Recovery Act at njeda.com/Economic Recovery Act. Next slide. In our commitment to transparency, equity, and faithful stewardship of taxpayer dollars, we are here today to welcome your constructive input as we work through the process of implementing the programs within the ERA. We're going to be providing multiple opportunities for this. We've done sessions on some of the other programs within the Economic Recovery Act, and today's session is one way that we'll be collecting informal program-specific feedback. So that's feedback on the draft program regulations. So we want to hear from you, and hopefully you take some time to read through them and have some thoughts on that. Next slide, please. Pursuant to the Executive Order number 63, we're providing opportunities again for groups and stakeholders to engage with us in crafting the rules around the Aspire program. Again, constructive input on how to ensure new programs created through the ERA are structured and administered in a manner that drives opportunities for all residents and communities. We're going to begin the session with a presentation that will summarize the draft rules, and the opportunity for public feedback will be available following the presentation. We're expected to be here for between 75 and 90 minutes, just depending on how much public feedback we get, but there will be plenty of opportunity for you to do that. Next slide. You can also submit written feedback, njeda.com/program-specific-feedback through September 24th for the Aspire program. And all of these public feedback sessions will be recorded and posted on njeda.com/program-specific-feedback so that members, program-specific-feedback. So that members of the public unable to participate in this virtual session will have the opportunity to review it. Next slide. Okay, feedback may be submitted verbally, and we'll go through this again at the end in case you forget, verbally using the raised hand function in Zoom or in writing through the Q&A feature. Input will not be accepted verbally until the NJEDA has concluded its presentation. Each member of the public who wishes to speak during the public feedback period should use the raise hand function. I'll acknowledge you, I'll unmute you, and then we'll give you that opportunity to speak. As the next bullet point says, you'll have approximately 3 minutes to speak and should limit your input to matters pertaining to the Economic Recovery Act of 2020, the Aspire program, or the draft rules. Each member will have one opportunity to provide remarks. If we do have a good amount of time remaining at the end of the session, we may reopen for additional remarks. You would just have to get in line again. Each person will be called on in the order that they raise their hand. This is not a session where if you've got a specific question about a specific project, to get that question answered. We may respond to basic questions or clarify input, but we're not looking to answer or respond to remarks. It's our opportunity to hear from you and to record what you're saying. And then, of course, speakers and members of the public should at all times maintain proper decorum and provide your remarks in a civil manner. Next slide, please. Okay. NJEDA staff is going to summarize the draft rules and provide context. To access the actual draft rules, you'll visit njeda.com/program-specific-feedback. For this presentation, please note, text highlighted in green indicates areas where the NJEDA has used the rules to add clarity to the legislation. Non-highlighted text is written into law, which NJEDA does not have discretion to change. So keep those things in mind as you listen to the presentation. And at this point, I'm going to turn the talking portion over to our Chief Executive Officer, Tim Sullivan.
Thanks, Patience, and happy Friday afternoon to everybody. Hope everyone's doing well. Patience, thank you as always for everything you do and for setting the ground rules. If you don't follow the ground rules, you'll be in trouble with Patience, which is not a good place to be. I kid because I love. This is a really important session for us. There's another one next week. We've been doing this pretty regularly around the standing up of the new programs and the regulations attached to the new programs.
So, oh, there you go.
Hey, Patience. It looks like Tim may have frozen on the
Yep,
screen here.
Yep, let him know that. So everyone bear with us for just a minute and blame the technology. Brian, you want to take over for a minute?
Yeah, I'm Brian Sabin. I'm the Chief Economic Growth Officer here at the Authority, and happy to kind of echo what Tim was saying, that this is a really important set of programs. There's the man himself. We'll hand it back to Tim. Tim, we lost you just when you were talking about the importance of the programs and how we're going about these processes.
Agree with whatever Brian said. Yeah, sorry about that. A little IT hiccup there on my end at my home IT. This is an incredibly complex program with lots of different features to it. You know, if you've read the draft regs, this is quite complex. There's a lot of different features and dimensions to this program. This process today and in the subsequent sessions that we have in the process of receiving written feedback, and then the ultimate formal public comment period that'll happen when and if our board approves these at the October board meeting, puts them out for public consideration, can only make these programs better. I think we saw this with Emerge, we saw this with some of the other programs as well. Public feedback, public input, expert commentary from stakeholders, whether those are no matter what kind of group you represent or what sort of background or perspective you bring to the table, only makes these rules and these processes better. So I just want to say thanks to everyone who's on the phone, who is not an EDA employee or EDA team member or one of our colleagues from our government, because if you're taking some time out of your day on a Friday, as we head toward the weekend here, we know that this is important to you, and your time here is important to us, so we appreciate it. Without any further ado, I'll probably hand it back to Patience, over to Nat to take us through the meat of this, because there's a good fair bit of meat here.
All right, thanks very much, Tim. So as Patience said, the ASPIRE program was established under the ERA. The act passed in January of this year, and it was significantly amended in cleanup legislation that was passed this last July. And ASPIRE is the successor to the Economic Recovery and Growth Program, or ERG. And like ERG, the ASPIRE program provides tax credits to incentivize strategic real estate projects in our state. Tax credits under awards under ASPIRE are based on an evaluation of project level financial need. And the program is intended, by supporting commercial and residential growth, to strengthen communities and create local benefits, and to encourage growth in communities with the greatest levels of distress in the state. Recognizing the critical importance of carefully husbanding public resources, the ASPIRE program includes a variety of protections that ensure scarce public funds reach the highest need targets. And the ASPIRE program will continue accepting applications until March 1st of 2027. So it's a high level points about the program. Next slide. So going to slide 9. So the ASPIRE program shares an annual program cap of $1.1 billion with the Emerge program that also continues for 6 years. In the 7th year, any unused program funds can be rolled over for use in that final 7th year. A typical ASPIRE project will be eligible to receive tax credit awards up to 45% of eligible project costs in nominal dollars. Commercial projects in a government-restricted municipality can receive a tax credit award up to 50% of project costs. And new construction projects using low-income housing tax credits can receive tax credits up to 60% of project costs. And in the other category of project under the ASPIRE program, the transformative projects, which are projects with a minimum of $100 million in project costs, can receive up to $350 million in tax credit awards. Other key features of Aspire are a 10-year eligibility period, which is the period during which tax credits are awarded and prevailing wage rates must be paid, and over which net benefits are calculated. And for projects over $10 million in project cost, negotiation and support for a community benefits agreement is also required. Next slide. So this is a highly abstracted, generic process for a typical real estate project, which there is not a typical real estate project, but here's a rough idea of how the program will go. So the first step is the application being submitted by the developer. A lot goes on beforehand, and we'll emphasize at a number of places throughout the presentation that there will be conversations with the host municipality, with local communities as part of community benefits agreement development, with ourselves to clarify program details. But the first official step will be the application submitted by the developer and the application review, next step by EDA, along with our partners at HMFA, at Treasury, at the Departments of Environmental Protection. There's coordination with all of them that takes place at that phase. And when everything is in order, a project application and proposal is submitted to the EDA board, following which applicants will have 12 months in which to finalize a community benefits agreement after board approval and to get a certificate of occupancy within 4 years of board approval. The next step in the process after getting board approval is going through all of the, after applicants have gone through all the details of getting their project costs, financing, all the I's and T's dotted and crossed. We go to project certification, which is the final step necessary to assure that the economics of the project that were approved by the board are still in effect at the time of certification. And if everything is in order, then the 10-year eligibility period begins at that point. Annual certifications can be made and tax credits can be released at that point. The tax credits will be released pro rata, 1/10 of the award every year over the following 10 years of the eligibility period. An affirmative action requirement and environmental compliance requirements continue for a couple of years after the certification and the first tax credits are issued. Biennially over the life of the program, there will be a required university program review in which the program performance will be detailed and analyzed and assessed. At the 7-year point, there will be a rate of return validation where we look at the project's performance and check to see whether it is performing as expected or if it is, possibly performing better than expected. And if that's the case, setting up an escrowing process where what we're referring to as excess profits would be escrowed at the 10-year period. At the end of the eligibility period, we do a final project true-up. And if the project has exceeded targets by more than 15%, then 1/5 of those surplus profits are shared with the Department of Treasury. At any time over this process, developers may appeal EDA actions or decisions, right, or reassign rights. Those are not shown in this overall schematic, but that hopefully gives an idea and overview for both residential and commercial projects, what the timeline looks like. So we're going to cover 4 broad areas: award size, eligibility, fiscal and resident protections, and transformative projects. And we will move directly onto award size. And slide 13, if we can just go to that. So as I mentioned earlier, a typical or baseline Aspire eligible project can receive tax credits up to 45% of project costs, up to a ceiling of $42 million. There's some bonuses that build up from that baseline. If you're a commercial project in a government restricted municipality, you can receive tax credits up to 50% of project costs. If you're a newly constructed residential project that's also using 4% low-income housing tax credits, you can receive tax credits up to 60% of project costs. And if you're a project using low-income housing tax credits, or if you're a project in one of the geographies called out in this slide, you can receive tax credits up to $60 million. And for those projects, that would also be subject to the applicable 45%, 50%, or 60% limits, depending on which those projects are subject to. If we're on slide 15 for eligibility. So there are quite a few defined geographies in the rules, and they're well defined in them. The geographies are significant because they play a large role in what types of projects are allowed, what shares of eligible project costs can be used to set upper bounds on tax credit awards, and what tax credit award ceilings may apply in actual dollars. And the map shown here on this slide highlights some of the larger defined geographies where Aspire projects are eligible. For example, the port districts include much of the eligible geography shown in North Jersey and in the New Jersey suburbs of Philadelphia. And the aviation district is clearly visible around Atlantic City. But some geographies are much more granular, and you'll need to consult the rules for the qualifying geography. In addition, I should note that places that are designated Planning Area 1 are eligible according under the state plan, as well as places within a half mile of rail or high-frequency bus transit that are either Planning Area 2 or a designated center, according to the state plan. And you should refer to the mapping URL that is shown under the map as a resource to help you determine the defined categories. And one final note, which is that for the transformative program, which we'll be discussing later, film projects can be located anywhere in the state. So that's a very easy map to show. Next slide. Slide 16. So to qualify for the Aspire program, residential projects must have project costs of at least $5 million if they're located in a qualified incentive tract or a government restricted municipality, $17.5 million if they're in a municipality with a population greater than 200,000, or $10 million if located anywhere else. And for commercial projects, 100,000 square feet is the minimum size for Aspire program eligibility. Next slide. So the Economic Recovery Act required EDA to score Aspire projects, but it didn't specify a scoring rubric or how to apply that rubric. The shading of this slide in green highlights that the project scoring approach described here is not statutorily prescribed, but it is a product of EDA rulemaking. Until such time as EDA determines that resources available for Aspire projects are oversubscribed, EDA proposes to use a scoring approach that assesses project consistency with overall program objectives of supporting equitable, sustainable, smart, and transit-oriented growth. And to that end, EDA will evaluate the extent to which proposed projects would advance these policy objectives, and policies that do advance those objectives would continue on to the next phases of program evaluation and support. The specific questions that are proposed for project scoring are not included in the rules right now. The categories where we intend to apply a test I just referenced them, but those questions will be provided to the EDA board at the same time the rules are brought to the board for action. Next slide, please. So to qualify for Aspire project funding, a project must demonstrate that it has a funding or financing gap, and there's really no way to avoid reading the slide for this one, so here goes. A project financing gap refers to the part of the total project cost, including reasonable and appropriate return on investment, that remains to be financed after all other sources of capital have been accounted for. And the key benchmark we'll be using here will be the reasonable and appropriate return on investment. And we discuss this a little bit more later in the presentation, but fundamentally, for each project, we'll be working with a third-party advisor to assess the location, the industry class, the extent of local economic disadvantage, and other relevant factors to set a project-specific benchmark rate of return. And that rate will be used as a benchmark throughout the project's life for evaluating project success and related program elements. Next slide. If an Aspire project has project costs greater than $50 million, the project can be developed in phases as long as each phase has costs greater than $50 million. And any project that includes newly constructed residential units must provide a minimum of 20% affordable housing. Next slide. You all may be aware that prevailing wages must be paid and are required for all project costs during project construction. It's important to emphasize, though, that for both the Aspire and Transformative programs, prevailing wages will also be required for all building services and maintenance throughout the eligibility period. For any project costs that may have been incurred prior to application, that applicants also seek to include as eligible project costs, prevailing wages must have been paid for those project elements to be eligible, either at the time or subsequently, and in time for those costs to be included in materials for EDA review. And finally, it's important to note that failure to comply will be grounds for withholding of tax credits and other possible penalties over the course of the eligibility period. So 2 final points about Aspire program project eligibility. The first is that projects must receive a letter of support by the time of application from the governing body of the municipality, which is effectively the municipal council or its equivalent, where the project will be located. And the second, as I mentioned during a discussion of the schematic, is that projects must meet affirmative action requirements for all work included as a proposed project cost and for 2 years after a tax credit certificate is issued, as well as also being required to meet minimum environmental and sustainability standards. And we include a URL here for you to see what those are and review those. And finally, applicants will have to acknowledge the need to meet these standards and provide a description of how they will be met as part of their application. Next slide. So now we'll talk about fiscal and resident protections. The first is the community benefits agreement. And as I mentioned earlier, any project with project costs above $10 million must negotiate, finalize, and support a community benefits agreement before obtaining project certification and final clearance to advance. A signed agreement with the chief executive of the host municipality is required at project certification, but at the time of project approval by the EDA board, all that's required is a letter from the chief executive of the municipality saying that they will negotiate a community benefits agreement in good faith with the applicant. Of course, if something has been well developed by that point, that's also fine. And the more progress that can be made earlier, the better. But those are the thresholds of requirements. After board approval, the applicant will have 6 months with 2 3-month extension periods to negotiate and finalize the community benefits agreement with the chief executive of the municipality. And note that a certificate of occupancy, as I said earlier, is required within 4 years of board approval. So the longer it takes to negotiate a CBA after board approval, the more pressure there may be on meeting project timelines. And for that reason, as I said, the more progress that can be made with host communities prior to board action, the better. Part of that progress is going to be working on this requirement in the ERA that the mayor of a host municipality must appoint a community benefits advisory committee with at least 3 members, none of whom, per our rules, may have an interest in the project or CBA programming. And that committee must meet publicly and transparently at least once prior to community benefit agreement finalization and must certify developer compliance with the terms of the CBA each year of the project's eligibility period. And all of these protections are especially important because the resources, because of the resources that EDA is proposing to make available for CBAs. As proposed in the rules, tax credit awards equivalent of up to 5% of eligible project costs are available. CBA related costs are to be accounted for in project soft costs. We're still on the CBA thing. So CBA related costs are to be accounted for in project soft costs, which itself has a ceiling of 20% of total eligible project costs, or as ongoing costs as part of developer cash flow. And a project's proposed CBA spending will be measured as the sum of project costs incurred during project construction, plus the capitalized value of operating costs programmed for the duration of the 10-year eligibility period. Next slide. So as with other EDA programs, projects in Aspire are subject to a net benefit test. The application of this test is subject to a few important details. First, the test is more stringent for communities that are not government restricted municipalities. For projects in government restricted municipalities, the threshold level of benefits is 150% of the tax credit award. For all other locations, the threshold level of benefits is 185% of the award. No net benefit test is required for residential projects, and food service and healthcare centers are also exempt from the net benefit test as long as they are over 10,000 square feet in size. Next slide. For the details on how we propose to measure benefits, we will use the in-plan model. For construction benefits, we'll be measuring direct, indirect, and induced tax revenues at the state level. For ongoing benefits, we'll measure direct and indirect tax revenues, again, at the state level. One thing it is important to note is that we are proposing to use regional average salaries for each real estate use and employee per square foot data. So for North Jersey and for South Jersey, for each, for the relevant real estate classes that are being proposed, rather than project-specific proposed employment numbers. And the reason is we'd like to have something that is comparable from project to project. We don't want there to be incentives for applicants to be over-optimistic about the characteristics of the employees who will be in the projects that they are building. And finally, it's also an administrative burden in our view for a developer or property manager to keep that kind of tracks and be responsible for tracking and reporting employee data and being accountable for that over the life of the project. And so that's the reason that we're proposing to use that particular approach. And another way that we're planning to make the net benefit test reflect regional specifics is by using distinct regional multipliers that are appropriate respectively for either South Jersey or North Jersey. And note that local tax benefits can be included in the net benefit test, but only when they benefit the state and only when they're sufficiently evidenced by the applicant. And lastly, just FYI, we're going to be using a 2% inflation rate and an 8% discount rate across all our impact calculations. Next slide. To ensure that tax credits are awarded through the Aspire program and to ensure that they achieve their policy and program purposes, the statute requires that these credits can be sold for no less than 85% of their nominal value. An exception to that that's also in statute is for residential projects that are funded in part by or financed in part by low-income housing tax credits. And recipients of those tax credits can sell them for no less than 65% of their nominal value. A second exception to this is being proposed in our rules. Residential projects that are not using low-income housing tax credits, but still have a plan approved by HMFA and EDA, can sell the credits they've been awarded for no less than 75% of their nominal value. Another element of the tax credit transfer program rules that a listener should be aware of is that tax credits under Aspire may only be transferred once. This will require heightened awareness by program participants from the very beginning and acknowledgement of this limitation by applicants and awardees at one or more points throughout the process. And transparency, so we're on the right slide now. So heightened transparency of Aspire program activity is a key element of the program's DNA. This slide and the following slide are included to ensure that the public is aware of the detailed information that will be published publicly about various Aspire program events. With respect to tax credit transfers, these details include the name of the transfer, the name of the transferee, and I'll just stop for a moment. You can see these other points. And so let's move on to the next slide. And with respect to transfers of interest in the incentive award agreement, so the first one, the prior slide was tax credit transfers. This is transfers of interest in the incentive award. We'll be publishing details like the names and persons of entities involved, the value of the interest being transferred, and the consideration being received by the transferor. So again, a lot of detailed wording around those things, but we just wanted to be crystal clear about the aspects of the project that will be open for public review. Next slide. So we discussed rate of return a little bit earlier. As I said, we'll be working with a third-party expert to determine a reasonable and appropriate rate of return for each project that's based on project-specific characteristics that I described. For all of your information, those rates for across all municipalities and industry classes in New Jersey have historically ranged between 11% and 19%. There may be variation on this in the future. We don't preclude that, but thought it'd be helpful just to describe what it's been in the past. Project economics, as we said, will be approved at and set at time of board approval and checked at project certification for consistency with board approval. And we'll review actual returns at year 7. And I believe these following points we've all gone over. So next slide, transformative projects. 2 slides to go. So whereas the base tax credit award for the Aspire program is 45% of eligible project costs, for the transformative program, the percent is capped at 40%. And whereas the Aspire program has various project tax credit award levels up to $60 million, for the transformative program, the maximum award tops out at $350 million. Transformative projects must also be located in an incentive area, a distressed municipality, government restricted municipality, or enhanced area. And again, I'll ask you to refer to the rules to see the precise definitions of all of those geographies. And transformative projects must also construct or involve the substantial rehabilitation of at least 500,000 square feet of space. For film studio projects, minimum space requirement is 250,000 square feet to qualify for transformative, and they may be, as I mentioned, located anywhere in the state. Next slide. Finally, transformative residential projects must develop a minimum of 1,000 units or develop at least 100,000 square feet of commercial space, as well as, if in a government restricted municipality, at least 250 units, if in an enhanced area, at least 350 units, or if in any other eligible incentive area, at least 600 units. And for transformative projects, commercial projects, for any residential project components, 20% of the units must be reserved for low and moderate income households, and of commercial space, no more than 50% of project space may be comprised of retail uses. So with that, that concludes my overview of the program elements, and we can move on to the final couple of slides and then questions from listeners. Thank you very much.
It's a lot of really good information. So just to reiterate, to submit your feedback verbally, raise your hand. The Zoom feature will put that in order based on when you raise your hand. I will make a request for you to unmute yourself, and you'll be provided with 3 minutes to talk. Again, maximum of 3 minutes, provide remarks. We cannot get into the weeds of anyone's particular project. So, but we are happy to clarify anything that you have heard today and maybe did not quite understand or needed perhaps a little bit more guidance on, but nothing that is project specific. This is our goal here, is to get your feedback on the rules and for you to make sure that you've had input in the way that we create this program. So I'm going to go ahead and start with Terry Reed. Terry, you should be, I've sent the request for you to unmute, so you should be in good shape now. And if you wouldn't mind, when you do start speaking, introduce yourself, let us know if you're calling from a municipality, an organization, and your realm as far as it relates to these Aspire rules. Thank you.
Sure. Hi, can you guys hear me?
We sure can.
Okay, awesome. And my name is Terry Reed. I work for Community Investment Strategies. We're an affordable housing developer. Thank you very much for the ability to comment on these draft rules. I have a couple of questions as I read through them that I would love some clarification on. The main thing, I guess if I could summarize the 3 of them, prevailing wages and building services. It seems like it's the intent of the program that all janitors, supers, porters be paid prevailing wage. Am I correct in that?
That's correct.
Okay, and that's true for even affordable housing programs as well, funded by tax credits?
Correct.
Okay. And then the second thing is I would like to confirm what has to be subtracted from the total project costs. It seems clear that any state and local soft funding, like some funding from HMFA, for example, would have to be subtracted. Is that correct?
Not sure exactly how to respond to that. I mean, we look at the project to assess the gap. So when we look at all the other sources of capital that have been provided, the idea is that we're the project supporter of last resort. So we'll look at the gap. It's not really a question of subtracting. It's a question of what is needed from us to fill whatever gap there is.
Okay, and that sounds better. I mean, because it sounded like, because when you subtract it from total project cost, then that reduces the amount of Aspire equity you'd be eligible for. So it would be better if that was just part of the gap, the gap analysis. That does make more sense. And then I guess just to confirm that any low-income housing tax credit equity would definitely not be subtracted, correct, from total project cost.
Again, I'm not sure exactly what you mean by subtracted, but the intent is for low-income housing tax credits to be an eligible source of equity, and we will be following the affordable housing funding and financing model consistent with the way that HMFA does it, and looking at deferred developer fees as a developer contribution of equity.
Okay. If I still have time, no?
About 20 seconds, Terry.
Okay. Soft cost definition, I sensed, I read there was some inconsistency in that language. It mentioned that construction or bridge loan interest is included, but then later on it said capitalized interest paid to third parties is not included, or vice versa. So I wasn't sure.
So for that, I would just encourage you to and request you to highlight that point and email it to us. I don't think we're in a position to address that right now, but please do share that with us and we'll take a look.
Okay, sounds good.
Thanks so much, Terry.
Thank you.
Next, we have Marty. Marty, I've just given you the ability to speak to us. If you could introduce yourself, tell us where you're from and what you're calling with regards to, and provide your remarks. Thanks.
Yes, good afternoon. I apologize if I cough a little bit because I'm a little bit under the weather. Yes, my name's Marty Berstein. I do consulting for a number of developers in New Jersey. The questions I had were more on the recognition of equity for that's required. So the 20% equity requirement, will EDA consider the tax credit equity as equity toward that 20%? I know New Jersey Housing recognizes as equity. I just wanted to confirm that EDA was. And then, with multiple programs, there's obviously challenges making it all work. But with New Jersey Housing, typically they are they're looking at a 115 debt coverage ratio, and they to maximize the debt. And when I put together some models, I end up with a situation where I'm at like 17 or 8%, 18% equity. And I was wondering if New Jersey Housing determines that's the equity requirement, would that satisfy EDA, or would they want it still increased up to that 20%? In which case, I'd have to either reduce my loan or reduce my tax credits, and that's what I was trying to avoid. So I just wanted to get clarification on those issues, and I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Marty. I mean, again, as I emphasized earlier, the intent is to follow the HMFA model for funding affordable housing. We will be counting low-income housing tax credits as equity, as we said, and following that model. So we have the model where, for let's call it a traditional project that's focused on a market rate tenancies, we would want to see 20% equity. We want to make it a little bit easier to invest in projects in government restricted municipalities. That's set by the statute at 10% equity. All I just want to say is those ways of thinking about projects are different from the affordable housing projects that use low-income housing tax credits. And again, as with the previous question, I'm not entirely sure exactly what you meant by some of the points. I'd encourage you to ask questions, clarifying questions in email so that we have them formally. But in general, we're going to be following the HMFA model. So that's how we're going to be handling it.
Okay, thank you so much.
In a customary way.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thanks, Zach. Thank you, Marty. Okay, next we have Julie Tatoni. Julie, I've unmuted you, and welcome to the feedback session.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity. My name is Julie Tatoni. I'm an attorney with Windell's Marks, and we work with various entities, including developers, for-profit and nonprofit. So the question that I have, the first question is on the 2-year carry forward, where actually it appears that based on the statute and the regulations, I think fairly closely parrot the statute, that for the most part, there isn't a carry forward of the unused tax credits, so that a developer or a purchaser of the tax credits typically would not be able to carry forward any unused amount. So in an amount that they couldn't use in a given tax year, they would not be able to, unless there are very specific extenuating circumstances, which I really couldn't figure out how those circumstances would apply to an Aspire project, saying that the redevelopment project was impacted by natural disaster, state emergency. And I wondered if someone can give an example of what that might be.
So I will leave it open for any of my EDA colleagues to address that, but this is, I think, a very detailed question that I think what would be most helpful is if you put that question in writing to us so that we can we can properly understand it and deal with it.
Okay, I can do that.
It's an important question, and thank you.
Okay, I appreciate that. With regard to refunds, my understanding under the ERG program was that an entity could get a refund as long as their tax liability, their original tax liability, was greater than the amount of the tax credit. So they could get a tax credit. So if you had $100,000 tax liability and you got $100,000 tax credit that you purchased or that you had, and you had already paid your taxes, you'd be able to get a full refund. And I just wanted to confirm that there's nothing that, it didn't appear to be that there's anything in this that changes it, other than there's a section that says you can't, you have to have at least paid the minimum requirement under the tax law. So if there's a minimum amount, say of $50,000 taxes, you can't get a refund of that, of the minimum amount. Is that accurate?
I'm going to give you the same response that I did
Okay.
last one. This is an important
Okay.
and detailed question, but I think unless there's somebody on the call from EDA who can respond to that, I think we should have that in writing and digest it.
Okay, I have two other really quick, easy questions, I think then. On the phases for projects, do you get the tax credits after you certify each phase?
So there will be a separate 10-year eligibility period for each phase. So I believe the short answer to that is then yes, and they will be available pro rata for each phase.
And if you have a 3-phase project and you complete phase 1, it has an eligibility period, you begin to receive your tax credits, you do the same for phase 2, but phase 3, maybe the market conditions change and you don't ever get to phase 3. Is there a look back? Is that an event for recapturing, or is that simply you underwrote each each phase separately, and therefore they can stand on their own.
Right. So first of all, let me clarify for the previous answer. For what I said was true for the transformative program. It was not accurate for the Aspire program because it seems very. I think it's unlikely that there will be phase programs, phase projects under Aspire. And I'm sorry, just because it's a nuanced question you're asking, and we're over the 3 minutes. I'm just going to ask if you could.
Okay.
Sorry. Thank you very much, though.
Thank you.
Expert questions.
So just to clarify, we want your feedback, we want your questions, but if they are nuanced questions, as Nat has said now a few times, send those via email so that somebody has the ability to put thought into them and respond well to your question, and try and limit your comments and feedback here to programmatic specific, not individual situation specific feedback. Next we have Ann Babineau. Ann, I just unmuted you. Hope you're doing well.
Hi, Ann Babineau, Wilentz, Goldman and Spitzer. We represent a number of private developers and public entities and are very interested in the program. I've taken a look at the statute and the regs, and I'm still a little bit confused about the extent to which land cost is includable within project costs.
Again, it's one of those things where there are a number of different situations, and generally it is not part of the eligible project cost. I mean, it's obviously part of the overall project economics, but so I think I'm going to take the spirit of your question as we need to clarify that so it's crystal clear.
I think that's a good follow through. I am looking at the definition of project costs. I'm looking at the definition of equity. And then I also see provisions in the regulation that call for an appraisal to be done so that you can make a determination about whether the price that was paid for land is greater or less than the appraised values. Those are the particular regulations that I kind of was reading together. And I think that providing a little more clarification on that would be very much appreciated.
Right, and I think in the spirit of Tim Sullivan's opening request for your feedback and making the program rules better with, benefiting from your expertise, I mean, the more detailed you can help us, point us in that direction so that we can be as clear as possible. We'd appreciate that feedback from you as well in writing.
Okay, will do.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next, we have Stuart Courtney. Stuart, I've just unmuted you. Please introduce yourself. Let us know where you're calling from.
Hi there, I'm Stuart Courtney. I'm principal of the Metro Company. We're a Jersey City-based affordable housing consulting and development company. And thank you for the opportunity for questions and comments. I just want to clarify, I believe, Nat, you said that there was a 20% cap on soft costs. If that's correct, I would request that be increased to at least 30%. And I'd also want to clarify as to whether or not that excludes developer fee and acquisition costs.
Thank you so much for your comment. I think we'll be able to, please put it in writing. We'll be able to kind of clarify some of that. There's some flexibility. We do have some flexibility that we will not have due to the statute. So appreciate that feedback.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Stuart. Next, we have Barbara Shore. Barbara, I've just unmuted you. Please introduce yourself and let us know what you're here to say.
Good afternoon. Thank you. I'm Barbara Shore with Community Investment Strategies. I'm a co-worker of Terry Reed, who opened our questions this afternoon. I wanted to actually, some of the other responders brought up what my questions were. So I'm going to piggyback on what Ann Babineau said with the project costs that need clarification. Land costs or costs related to land seem to be some discrepancies in the discussion. So clarification on that would be helpful. Also, on what Stu just raised, I think the 20% cap on soft costs may be light. And then following the developer fee costs, if you can hold true what you expressed to Marty's question that you're following the HMFA regulation on that, I think it would be helpful for the developers on the affordable housing side. And then lastly, the community benefits agreement. I think it would be helpful if you could provide some templates, examples, references, something to point us towards in what would meet your goals for those CBAs. Thank you.
Thank you. So again, if you'd like to provide feedback, use the raise your hand function.
Yeah, patience. This is Brian Sabin. I may
Sure.
just jump in quickly on the CBA question. I think EDA has an interest in terms of making sure the quality of those commitments are understandable and verifiable. However, we do not have specific goals regarding community benefits for any given project or community benefit agreements. That's a conversation that needs to happen between a municipality and the developer as part of that process of making sure there's local support for the project. But certainly the regulations provide clarity around the specificity of the commitments that we want to see and the ability to enforce against those commitments. Hopefully that's helpful. We'll of course kind of comment on the other two aspects of your question, but in terms of the specifics there, we're not going to put out guidance on what the state wants to see from community benefits agreements.
Thanks, Brian. So again, if you would like to provide written feedback, it's njeda.com/program-specific-feedback, and that's open through September 24th. We'll have another session, another public session on Monday at the same time, 3 p.m. If you have colleagues that you know would have liked to have joined today and could not, and you can get that link right on the NJEDA website. Without additional hands raised and additional questions, we'll say thank you all for joining us. A robust group of listeners, and we appreciate the time that you spent with us. We appreciate your questions and comments and look forward to working with you in the future on the Aspire program. Have a great weekend.